listening to One, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hi, hello.
Hi, hello.
Welcome to COVID Cast 2.0.
Welcome to, yeah, that's a good.
Yeah. So there's COVID in our house again. Even though we're both boosted, I got it for the second time, and you've gotten it for the first time.
You know what, though? That's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
How do you feel,
I don't want to put doubt on vaccines.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think that given the fact that I've been teaching in person, except for the initial COVID leave, right? I feel very fortunate that this is the first time I've had COVID.
And even though we feel like crap, it's pretty mild for both of us.
I think I'm at the point where I sound a lot worse than I feel.
You don't sound great. And apologies to listeners for the fact that we are both going to be
sorry
a little
that I sound
stuffy
like this.
this
But
episode.
honestly, this hasn't been as bad as like a flu for me. So I feel very fortunate. I'm going to be honest. It's mostly just congestion and exhaustion.
Yes.
Like,
we're both very tired.
it's a very specific
we both have brain
kind of
fog.
sick.
This is going to be a brain foggy episode.
Yeah. So I feel so fortunate that one, we've been in it this long and I hadn't gotten it, even when you got it, which was proof that my vaccine was really working then. But also this Omicron is just, it's so easy to get.
Everyone seems to be getting this one for sure.
Everyone I talked to in the medical field, as soon as I started having symptoms, were just like, stay home, don't, So this has been a very mild sickness for both of us. You said this was more mild than your first time, even. And I will say, the worst part is truly, it feels like a bad sinus infection, but you're very tired.
Yeah,
So,
I'm just super, super tired. That's the moral of the story.
yeah, I'm mostly tired at this point. Now, it is I will say, if you've had Omicron, it's every day. It's just like, what's today?
Yeah, it's a grab bag of symptoms, and it changes.
I spoke with someone at High State Health about it, just to make sure, like, for me not being in school, obviously, for a few days. And just to make sure I was, like, doing what I could, because I have asthma and, just trying to, like, check my boxes. And this lady was like, so what have you had so far? And I, like, listed them, and she's like, okay, well, the next couple days you'll have this, 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 and this, and, like, literally in that order. I've had them. I want to call her back and be like,
hey, you were right.
Why don't you say I feel great and I'm cleared up?
Yeah.
But man, here we are back again.
A little rough.
Poor Chelsea got it like almost exactly 90 days
Yeah.
from the last time.
The immunity you're supposed to have is, I've read anywhere from 90 days to 5 years, and I'll tell you what.
5 years?
Yeah.
Oh, girl.
What a range, right? But my immunity ran out almost exactly at the 90-day mark, apparently.
Well, again,
But
you know what? We're
not
very
too bad.
fortunate.
I'm on the mend. I think I'm on the uphill side of it. I feel better every day.
This is the best I felt.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I'm
just
just
super
getting
tired
better. I think
still.
I just sound like
Yeah.
honestly. You're gonna have to bleep it, but I sound like it. And they're gonna say
I'll
it.
bleep it. Don't
This is
worry.
gonna be a bad review. If I had vocal fry before, imagine what this is now.
I think bad reviews about vocal fry at this point are just, it's just misogyny.
It's
like,
personal.
that's really all it is.
Anyways,
It's just the way our voices are.
I'm sure that person stopped listening.
Well, I hope.
But if they didn't, they're gonna love this version of my voice. I sound like I'm like inflated.
COVID fry. Anyway, okay.
Well, in more news about how perfect the world's timing is.
Yeah,
So this is episode 51.
it is.
If you didn't listen to episode 50, it's probably my favorite thing we'll ever do ever.
Yeah. It
Until
was
Risha comes back again.
a great conversation we had with Risha on banned books, and it's turning out to be very timely.
And because as fate would have it, since we released episode 50, which was with Risha, about banned books, there's a huge news story that came out of Tennessee about, what was it, McMinn County, Tennessee? Their Board of Education got rid of Mouse, which is a graphic novel about the Holocaust. Because of rough, objectionable language, which is, I'm going to say again, it's a story about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And also because of a drawing of a nude woman. And when we say nude woman, we mean one boob.
It's a it's a graphic novel, so it looks like cartoon comics that you'd find in the newspaper, kind of. And there's so the story includes a recounting of a suicide. It's part of the character's mother dies, basically, and there's an illustration of
His father finding her in the tub.
In the tub, and
she
she is naked because she's in the tub, and you can really kind of barely see nudity.
It's just that she was naked when she killed herself.
Yeah.
And so the image that you're looking at is of Art's father finding his wife dead. Mm-hmm. And in all of that, the only thing they're worried about is a cartoon boob. Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have to protect the children.
I mean,
by making sure that they don't know about the atrocities.
I'm going to have a lot to say about this. But basically, the short of it is that Risha was just on talking about her experience with banned books, and Mouse is a Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel.
Yeah.
That was just removed from a curriculum in Tennessee because of, I'm having a really hard time with the nude part, but rough, objectionable language, which I believe if you're teaching about the Holocaust, that happens. If you don't know what Mouse is, it's a piece by Art Spiegelman about sort of the reckoning of his family following their experience in the Holocaust. It's 2 books, but it's a graphic novel I was taught in college. It's something that's used in a lot of curriculums in middle and high schools. Students love it when they read it. It's very interesting as a way to connect because, as the title gives away, the Jews are mice and the Nazis are, you know what I mean? So it's like it's a game of cat and mouse.
They're cats.
And there are other animals that relate based on, you know what I mean, what people they are. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting because not only are you learning this historical piece about a family's real experience and just what kind of wreckage it caused for them, but on top of that, you're making really interesting connections to the literature. Mm-hmm. So that was just banned, and since then there's been a huge uproar about it. Yeah, rightfully so.
It's not just there either. It's not just this really loud example in Tennessee. There are also, I mean, this is kind of happening everywhere right now because there's just a lot of memeing happening. If a thing happens on social media, it's instantly amplified across the entire world, and that's kind of what's going on. There was some reporting around this, and I found it was like an NBC article, put it in the sources, but there's this records request to 100 school districts in around the Houston area, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin areas. Records request that NBC went through, and that request showed that a small sampling of the state's 1,250 public school systems, out of those, 75 formal requests by parents or community members to ban books from libraries happened during the first 4 months of this school year. In comparison, only 1 library book challenge was filed at those districts during the same time period a year earlier. So it's just like the trendy hip thing for people to be up in arms about this.
Yeah.
And there's a directed political effort to make it happen.
And it's, for teachers, this makes me very nervous.
Yeah. We have stuff happening like Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, has gone as far as calling for criminal charges against any school staff, so teachers who provide children with access to young adult novels that some people have labeled as problematic for whatever reason. So I get why you're afraid as a teacher, because
I'm very
people
nervous, and especially
trying
because,
to criminalize the teaching of books.
Well, that, and also, especially when you think about teaching things related to the Holocaust. So I've taught Mouse before. I'm going to be teaching it to my seniors here shortly. And I had a coworker text me about this book banning, and I basically jokingly replied, like, they can pry it out of my cold dead hands because it's a pillar for me. You know, like, it's not going away. It's an important story. So if you're listening to this and you're mad about book bannings, which you should be, if you're listening, you're mad, here's what you do. You can support your schools and libraries by, like, donating books and things like that. That's something that a lot of people have done. But most importantly, use your voice. Reach out to your school and your board members and your reps and things like that, and your local government. It has to start local, and make sure that they know that you feel it's important for students to have access to books like Mouse. It has to start there. Now, obviously, giving to public schools and libraries and things like that is always incredible work. But really, what's going to shake something like this is a voice. So if you feel so compelled to fight the good fight, which I know most of our listeners do anyways, just by existing, that's like the most helpful thing you can do. And go back and listen to episode 50 for Risha's whole story, because it's literally this. I mean, it's just this.
I'm just going to get on my soapbox one final time to wrap up our current stretch of commentary about book banning, and that's that it is a practice that is against critical thinking. It's illiberal, it's dangerous, it comes from a place of fear and wanting to control inquiry and stifle free thinking, and it's basically just a form of censorship that says students can't and shouldn't think for themselves, and it's gross. And that's how I feel about that. We need to empower our students to think for themselves.
I have a quote hanging in my classroom, a sign. It's been up since my first year, and it says, yes, books are dangerous. They should be dangerous. They contain ideas. And I think that's so great. So
Yep.
that's from Pete Hotman. But if you're mad, let people know. Make sure that you're playing an active role in your school's decisions of things like this. Make sure you tell them if it upsets you. Make sure, I mean, honestly, and this could have been our whole episode probably as well, but books aren't the dangerous things for kids in these cases. And it's probably in their hands.
I guess I would just say it's inappropriate to let the latest political meme activity dictate the education our children have a chance to receive. It's crazy, and we should not let that happen. So anyway, okay, let's transition.
Support your teachers.
Yeah, support your teachers. Just do that.
And your librarians.
Yeah.
They do good work.
So this week we're going to be talking about a thing we've been threatening to talk about since maybe the beginning of the podcast. We've talked about Common Core, and we've talked about some other things relating standardized testing. We've talked about a lot of things that relate directly back to No Child Left Behind, but we've never given the quick summary of what No Child Left Behind is, why it was written into existence in the Bush era, and whether or not it worked. So it's going to probably be a little bit of a quicker episode. We know that last week's episode was pretty long, kind of a departure from our usual format, but we really just wanted to give Risha the time to tell her story because it's awesome. So anyway, NCLB.
No Child Left Behind.
Yep. No Child Left Behind, henceforth known as NCLB, because that's just too many words. Why are we still talking about No Child Left Behind? If you're in the educational world, you know that it's not. The most important provisions of it are no longer around. They've been kind of stripped out by subsequent acts of the Obama era.
Right as I got my job. I was only in education a couple years before it went away. But for anyone in education, you know that there's always something new. It has letters that you call it. And it's already something you've done.
There's always a new acronym to annoy you.
No Child Left Behind. I suppose it is important in some ways because we do need to keep track of things that haven't worked. Right. So I don't have a problem with maybe just refreshing to be like,
I guess it's just
what was happening
the
here.
point being, it's not exactly a timely conversation in the way that book banning is, especially, but we do want to revisit our attempts and mistakes and learn from them.
Some of this still is in my world, though.
Absolutely.
In the classroom. So, okay.
There's still a legacy we're dealing with.
Yeah. So No Child Left Behind was the main law for K-12 general education for us in the U.S. from 2002 to 2015. 13 years in the world of education is a long time.
Sure.
And so between 2015 and now, that's also been an entire other lifetime of education. But I am still currently dealing with some of it that keeps coming back up. So it feels fresh. I thought it was more recent than that.
Well, this is kind of funny because what NCLB was originally was an update to what's called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which I think technically still kind of exists. So NCLB was a renaming of that law and an
then
update
now
to
it's
it.
Every Student Succeeds.
Yeah, Obama
Gotcha.
also renamed and updated it. Now it's called the Every Student Succeeds
Gotcha.
Act, which is the version of it still on the books. But all of this is there are amendments and additions and changes to education law as far back as Lyndon Johnson.
It's so weird that we keep updating this because it's basically we keep updating this thing and shining it up and giving it a new name and a cute logo and an apple.
It's an update to educational policy that hadn't really been changed or even revisited since the Johnson administrations in the 60s. So that's a long time to neglect national educational policy.
Yep.
Yep. We like to do that.
I'm not going to disagree.
Really like to neglect our national educational policy. The Reagan administration did a bunch of scary reports on education in the 80s, and there came out of that work this report, A Nation at Risk. Okay.
Oh.
We have to create some fear in order to get anything done. So this was by
so
Reagan's.
That was Reagan?
Yeah, Reagan's
Okay.
National Commission on Excellence in Education wrote this report called A Nation at Risk, and the report was basically like, hey, America's economic security is going to be severely compromised unless there's a complete redoing of the educational system and an increase in a set of standards, basically.
Ronnie?
Yeah.
How'd it go?
We actually have a whole episode planned on Reagan-era effects on the educational system in America, but this is kind of coming out of
Gotcha.
that effort. So what it is, like we're talking about, it's created to hold schools accountable for how students learn and how they achieve. And it's controversial now because it
penalizes them.
Yeah, it created this whole system of penalties for schools that don't show improvement. So before NCLB, this is with the Johnson Act, there were a lot of schools that were not diverting much funding or effort toward progress of certain disadvantaged student groups. So, kids who receive educational services often shut out of general education, that kind of stuff. They're also left out of state testing. So schools that have populations of students who are, in poverty, students of color, students receiving special ed resources, students with limited or no English skills, NCLB was set up to address shortcomings in student achievement in those focus areas. So it did this by means of setting up this system of accountability. Lord. Do you want to talk us through?
This is where things get bad.
Yeah, why don't you talk us through how it did this?
You and I are, I would say, quite a bit a product of this.
Oh, yeah. This was happening while we were in the educational system.
Because we graduated high school in the late 2008.
We were in school during the time period when schools were most acutely obsessed with standardized testing.
Yeah. And then we were the first graduating class that the Ohio graduation test applied to,
which was
called OGTs.
The standardized test that was attempting to address the mandate of NCLB.
Right. So maybe we're more qualified to speak on this than I originally thought we were. But basically, NCLB broke down the school accountability into annual testing. So there had to be a statewide math and reading test every year from 3rd grade through 8th grade, and then once in grades 10 through 12. And
that's
in Ohio,
lot of testing. Every year in 3rd through 8th grade is a lot of testing.
In Ohio, that was the high school portion, was 10th grade. And so we took that as 10th graders. And then when I first started teaching, that was still the test that we were using because I was teaching 10th grade. So parents and caregivers had the right to get individual test results for their kids, they believed. And so all the kids had to take the test, including at least 95% of students in the disadvantaged groups. So that's how they were targeting those groups who they thought needed the most support.
And those are the ones I listed. The law, I'm not just making up groups that I think are disadvantaged in
that's
education.
the list of them.
The law was Bush was really interested in addressing students in poverty, students of color, students receiving special ed services, and limited or no English speaker.
So there was the
ESL students.
Annual testing, which was a chunk of it.
Yep.
And at one point for the Ohio graduation test, the 10th grade test that was happening, the passing score on that was a 60%. I mean, it was truly, it was a whole other world. So from there, schools had to publicly report their results, and they had subgroups of them. And so they had to show, for example, how many students that were in special education and how they performed on certain portions of the test to prove, as part of this accountability, what their scores were.
Part of what was going on here was that there were schools that were generally seen to be high achieving schools by means of old ways of reporting success. But what was happening there was that, at least what educational policymakers thought was happening was that those schools were using good results from their high achievers to mask bad results from their low achievers.
You're not using the results of,
Right. So people who were struggling were falling under the radar because the scores were being masked by other populations within the schools. So basically the students who needed help most were not getting the attention that they needed because there was no scrutiny being applied to scores from these districts because they otherwise appear to be good until you broke them out into some of these subgroups.
So then, along with that, they had to prove academic progress. So every student in these public schools, including the special ed and all these other specific groups, had to be proficient, labeled proficient, or scored, the proficient level on tests. And they had to set a target, and that was called adequate yearly progress, which is our AYP. And that's something we still use. AYP is still a function that exists in education today.
I do want to say one thing about that. The law was agnostic on the issue of whether or not a student started the year 3 grades behind. So basically, this was one of the main problems of this law was that if a student started a year, 3rd grade, and they happen to be 3 levels behind in reading or math, and again, a big focus on reading and math, almost at the exclusion of everything else, but we'll get there. But if you happen to be 3 grade levels behind in reading when you got into 3rd grade, you'd still have to get them up to the 3rd grade level or the law would punish you, which is a big problem because if you make progress from a student and get them to only be 1 year behind, it was even huge progress.
It was even past 3rd grade, though, if they're trying to... Oh, you're saying the requirements for the 3rd grade testing, basically, is what you're saying.
I'm saying if a student comes into third grade
Gotcha,
3 years
sorry. I
behind
misunderstood
and
you.
they still don't get to third grade reading level, NCLB is still going to punish that student, even if that teacher,
Even though they've made
even
2
though
years
that
worth
student
of progress.
might have made 2 years worth of progress in 1 year.
Right.
So this is kind of like, we now have all these value added models to address those kinds of scenarios where, okay, it may be true that when compared to some objective standard, this student is not where their peers are, but that student may make an incredible amount of progress in a year, and we need to have laws that take those kinds of moves into account. So anyway.
So based on the AYP, then the schools received a report card from the state on how they performed, which is something that the state of Ohio decided to also keep and make worse. The school had to share their information with parents of all of their students, and if they didn't meet AYP, then they could be labeled as needing improvement.
Yeah.
Because of their test scores.
Adequate yearly progress became the gold standard that everybody started to try to adhere to, despite the fact that it ended up causing more problems than it was worth.
Truly.
Sort of.
So the penalties, the schools with many low-income students were called Title I schools. And so if a Title I school didn't meet the adequate yearly progress, then the NCLB allowed the state to change a school's leadership or even close a school if necessary. And if a school repeatedly failed to meet AYP, parents had options to move their kids to other schools. But this penalty only applied to Title I schools.
Yeah.
Which is super, there's so many red flags in that statement alone.
It's this, I will say about this in general, the general political landscape, it surprised most people that a Republican administration would advocate more federal intervention in the public educational system, because it's not common for Republicans to be like, yes, more federal involvement. However, I think what appealed to a lot of conservatives at the time was that it had this kind of tough love approach, which if you remember anything about, policing around the same time, it was very much like, it was very much an approach, a kind of heavy-handed approach to accountability and punishment. Yeah. And so you can tell from what Katie just described here, Title I schools are those that are going to be most in need of resources because they have the highest population of students who are struggling, who need support. So this law created this accountability system, but those schools that most needed support were, of course, the ones who were performing worst against the standards, which means that they were penalized most often, which means they wouldn't get funding that they needed to address the problems in the first place. Mm-hmm. And
they were losing students.
It created this... I read one article that described it as quicksand scenario for Title I schools, because it just basically made it so that you could take away a whole leadership team, you could turn a school into a charter school, you could lose your entire student body, and all of those punishments applied to the schools that most needed help.
And they were probably in communities that needed schools.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And that was the other thing, is that part of the reason this flopped so magnificently is that parents of students in Title I schools a lot of times can't just pick up and send their kid to some other competing district. It costs money to transport your kids to and fro. It takes time.
Based on your job,
right? If you got a full-time job, you have to provide transportation for your kid to get to these other schools. So even though it created the illusion of choice, it didn't create a scenario where a lot of students could take advantage of the supposed alternatives provided by NCLB. So that was part of the structural problem of this punitive system.
So along with those issues within the school accountability, another thing that was required under NCLB was that all teachers had to be highly qualified in the subject that they teach.
If you say highly qualified to a teacher, they'll sneeze. They'll react very badly.
It's HQT. It's a format to fill out.
HQT.
Yeah. But
love our acronyms.
Yeah, this meant that special education teachers had to be certified and demonstrate knowledge in every subject that they taught.
That's not normally how it works, to be quite clear.
And this has now been changed. Now the federal law only requires teachers to be state certified and licensed. But at the time...
Yeah, the Every Student Succeeds Act changed that particular accountability measure. No,
but every year we have to fill out a form that says that we're highly qualified to teach what we teach because of our bachelor's or master's or the combination of them.
We talked about this in one of our previous episodes, but highly qualified boiled down to you have an advanced degree in your subject matter. That's kind of a crude way of summing up what that meant in practice.
Just additional hours and training, or like how, I mean, there's so many ways to get an education license. Like that's who that, like the hard part about highly qualified is that it hurt teachers who came to teaching in more interesting ways than just like your bachelor's. You know what I mean? Like,
it also hurt teachers who had been in the system for quite a long time.
Because at that point,
a teacher who's been teaching for 35 years is now required to go get a master's degree.
Sure.
So,
but I know a couple of teachers that I worked with who had other jobs and other careers before they became a teacher.
Yeah.
And that was a sticking point for them that then they had to go spend their money on to get whatever.
Yeah. And by the way, by hurt, I meant not that it's a bad thing for teachers to go get more advanced degrees or more training, but just that it creates a financial burden on teachers.
Because it's expensive to get hours.
Yeah.
So highly qualified came from that. And then the NCLB did give more flexibility to states in how they spent their federal funding, but it was only as long as their schools were improving. So this law also required schools to use science and research-based instruction and training teaching methods, and that still exists today. So thanks a lot, NCLB.
Well, which is not to say that we haven't always been using those methods in public schools. It's more just like it made everything explicit.
I don't want to crap on some of these things because it's like, yes, of course, we're not just like flailing in the wind. Yeah. I mean, like, I promise the things that I come up with are usually based in something that...
You're not flailing in the wind?
Some days.
Not today.
I think every teacher since 2020 has been flailing in the wind. And if you're not, then I want to be you. And then finally... for kids with an IEP, which is the individualized education program, so they've been diagnosed with something or require certain supports, right, for a learning environment. There are
accommodations that are made for students who need, more time on tests or special tools or calculators or whatever the heck it is.
And that still exists today. Mm-hmm. So NCLB did pave the way to make sure that these kids always have these accommodations on statewide tests.
So like extra time to take them or something like that.
Yeah, or like certain devices that can help, or, there's all kinds of supports that can happen for someone with an IEP. So that's good. Yeah. I'm glad that we did improve those students, their experience and things like that. Their learning, I think, is good. So
I think it is fair to say that on the whole, NCLB was seen to be kind of a failure in the educational world, but we did see some improvements and learn some really interesting things because of it. So even though you and I are going to have a pretty critical take on NCLB here because it wrecked a lot of stuff in a really long-term kind of way, well, it still had some good parts.
Honestly, it's made me have so much paperwork.
Right. It created a lot of paperwork.
That's what I'm mad about.
A lot of paperwork.
I'm just mad about that. That's my problem.
Right.
So what was the legislation trying to solve with NCLB?
Yeah, the problems that were trying to be addressed here, again, a lot of this came from that Reagan report, A Nation at Risk. It's just so scary sounding, like A Nation at Risk. It needs to have like
a creepy, like a fireside chat title.
Deep voiced man doing a voiceover. A Nation at Risk.
It's like a 60 minutes.
Yeah,
breaking.
Yeah. Tick, 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 tick. So really, the ultimate goal, the ultimate problem that was trying to be solved here, we were trying to make it so that every student would be able to read and to do math and there was a time frame on this. It was by mid-2014, all of these targets. So
I still can't do math, so they got work.
I cannot convey to you the amount of chaos that states were undergoing to try to meet these markers that were mandated by NCLB. And what happened was that a lot of states applied for and were granted extensions over and over and over again to try to bring achievement up to these arbitrary standards set by NCLB, which is ultimately part of why the law fell apart. It was also terribly underfunded. It only got maybe I can't remember, but something like half of the amount of dollars it was supposed to get to actually make these improvements. They were also supposed to update and edit the law every couple of years, and that just didn't happen either. So it was this mandate that didn't have much behind it in a lot of ways. But anyway, making adequate yearly progress in math and in reading by mid-2014. That was the goal. And then also this testing regime was how they were going to accomplish that. So, as we mentioned before, George W.'s tough love approach, it was motivated by this sense that states weren't doing enough to address issues in low-performing schools. So Bush saw NCLB as a chance to create a new role for the federal government, and that was this kind of tough guy role. And that's really sort of the only way that they got buy-in from Congress initially, I think. But then, and it was passed with bipartisan support at the time, but what we can kind of agree on now is that the tough guy approach really didn't work. Again, it proposed to solve these problems by this new federal system of testing. Very strict, very controversial. A lot of critics said it was obsessed with standardized testing, as we now know. Became super unpopular among teachers and parents pretty quickly. Let's talk a little bit about what the long-term effects have been.
Paperwork.
Again, as we mentioned, yes, paperwork, tons and tons of paperwork. As we mentioned, NCLB doesn't really exist in its original form anymore. It was succeeded by the Every Student Succeeds Act in December of 2015, and it stripped out all of the national provisions of NCLB, which were all of the real stringent kind of punishment systems, restructuring systems.
At least we got rid of those.
Yeah, but it also kind of took out any teeth that would have made schools feel urgency about making adequate yearly progress also. So it's just a weird thing. It is a huge problem to try to solve, and I think that the main takeaway from all of this was that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to fixing structural problems in our education system.
At any level.
So,
even within the same schools. I mean, there's just no... What works in some rooms aren't going to work in...
right.
There's just no... Yeah, sorry, I'm getting mad.
No, so I guess, again, long-term effects, there were tens of thousands of schools that ended up dealing with sanctions from No Child Left Behind.
Sure.
Like, bazillions of hours of effort went into this. So in mid-2012, there were more than 6,000 schools that were being restructured. Restructured means you can choose a new leader, replace a principal, replace the district leadership of a school system, do all of this big change from the top down kind of things to try to address issues within the school. So there are thousands of schools dealing with that kind of restructuring. There were thousands more that had been required to take some of the less drastic steps. But this was really affecting the day-to-day in a lot of public schools in this country. Obviously, an approach to standardized testing created by NCLB is still creating waves, as you mentioned. For example, here in Ohio, they've really kind of embraced some of the legacy of NCLB by attempting to have a regime of standardized testing.
We love testing. We would probably do more if we could. We would probably just,
I think standardized testing is important to have because we want to know what our schools are doing to provide education to all students. We need to have some way of comparing apples and oranges, basically. Which is what standardized testing attempts to do. It attempts to say, okay, this district is struggling. This one over here is doing something right. What's the difference in these districts and how can we move students along? So cool. Standardized testing is one way to do that. Great.
I disagree.
Well, I don't personally think that standardized testing is in and of itself a bad thing. I do. I think that in every real life implementation of standardized testing that I've seen, the accountability system around it is totally broken. So I don't think having test data is bad. I think that the way that we interpret and then create consequences from that testing is bad.
I think that we value it too much.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean...
Oh, we have way mixed up priorities about it, for sure.
I just don't think that one day of my whole year is more important than every other day that I've done with my kids.
Oh, no, I would totally agree with that.
And that's all it comes down to. And what if that day your dog dies? Or your boyfriend breaks up with you, or you miss a school bus.
Yeah, high stakes testing creates... but again, ridiculous. The high stakes is not intrinsic to standardized testing. We've made it high stakes, and it need not be. I don't know. We've just created this whole culture of fear around standardized testing that came from NCLB, and it should not be that way. It should be the data that we use to make informed decisions about how we're doing instruction. But what it's become is this horrifying high stakes song and dance where teachers end up having to spend gazillions of hours in their school year preparing students to take the test. And that's just not, it's not what we should be doing. And the reason we shouldn't be doing it is because we know the long-term results of NCLB. We know that it basically didn't work. It didn't work. So there are a whole bunch of reports that have been done on the efficacy of NCLB. There's this guy named Thomas Ahn. He did research. Another guy named Jacob Vigdor. They did research in North Carolina. It's a test environment for a lot of educational policy in North Carolina for reasons.
They also have a hard time keeping teachers. They have a horrible retirement system.
It's a weird place to be, but it's also where a lot of research gets focused. But Basically, these guys did research in North Carolina, and what they found was that schools that had missed the goal for only 1 year and weren't yet facing consequences improved. Those schools looked and said it was like a wake-up call for them. Those schools improved. And so did schools that faced the biggest consequence, which was a total restructuring. So like firing the principal, getting rid of this, whatever, school board, district leadership, whatever it was, turning it into a charter school. Schools that faced those consequences also improved. But everything in between, transfers, tutoring, new curricula, hiring consultants, threatening to restructure, those things that were a result of NCLB, those attempts to improve did not actually do anything.
Didn't do it.
This might be because families didn't or couldn't take advantage of the options that schools were supposed to offer, like we talked about earlier. But we really don't know for sure why it seemed to work at the extreme ends of the scale, but not in the middle.
Huh.
They also found that the most common strategy for this restructuring approach was simply replacing the person at the top, the principal of a school. And the effect, this is really interesting to me, the effect on student performance was significant, equivalent to reducing class size by 1/3 to 1/2. Simply changing the principal in a school during one of these restructurings would improve student performance in the same way that reducing class size by 1/3 to 1/2 would.
So just changing the principal.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of mind-blowing? But then again, when I talk to my teacher friends, I know how strongly the attitudes and methods of a principal I know how strongly those things can affect teacher performance, teacher well-being, student achievement. You kind of know it. You kind of know it in your bones. But what this study showed that it can have an enormous impact, which goes to show that districts around the country should be paying a lot more attention than they do to hiring practices of school principals, because it's a big deal. I'll say from my own educational history that I could tell the difference between strong and weak school leadership. Yeah. And agreed. I could tell when my teachers were and weren't happy. I could tell when things were working in the classroom and they weren't. And a lot of that was just the culture that was inherited from the top down. Yeah. And
it's interesting. I mean,
apparently it makes a really big difference.
It must. That's wild to think that it could do that much. But I would hope that every year we're just getting a little bit better too, right? I hope. That's wild.
Yep.
Oh, what a mess.
Yep. So anyway, this legacy, we're still dealing with it. The original Elementary and Secondary Education Act 50 years ago, the role of the federal government was really clearly defined. It was to ensure equal opportunity for every student, and we've failed miserably at that over time. But it's still a thing that we are trying to figure out, and it's still an area that doesn't have nearly as much research time dedicated to it as it should. Mm-hmm. And we're still just vastly underfunding our education system in this country. So this whole scary Reagan-era report, if they redid that same kind of research today, it would still probably be the same situation where our schools are in trouble, and it's for a whole lot of systemic reasons, and we still really haven't done enough as a country to address it, I think. Yeah, and I think that one thing that report probably did get right is that our long-term economic stability in this country is, if we're not already, we're going to start to see really deep effects of inadequacies in our educational system, in our economic system. So anyway,
So a lot of it I'm still dealing with is the fault of this. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I don't think it's easy for me to sit here and want to just crap on it. Not only because we're a product of it, but because it's what I was dealing with and still partially dealing with, and even in my career now at 9 years. But I am glad that we figured out some of the ways to service students who need support. I think that there are some lasting things that historically I think we'll be glad.
Yeah, I do think one of the strengths of NCLB was that it shone a light on these areas that had been systemically underserved for a very long time. It's actually kind of fascinating to me that Bush made such a big deal about educational policy in his...
I'm kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, because not very many people who run for president in this country pay attention to educational policy or make a big deal about it, because it's kind of boring probably nobody now would do it because it doesn't grab eyeballs. It's not sensational. It doesn't carry far and wide on social media when people talk about educational policy because, again, to many people, it seemed to be very boring. But this is an area of focus that our government absolutely needs to turn its attention to, like, ASAP.
Yeah.
Because...
yeah, just supporting it. Just spending more on it would be a lot.
There's a massive exodus of teachers from the educational system going on right now. People are leaving jobs at the highest rate of any industry right now. Public school. I wonder why. Yeah, I read the other day that teachers are leaving.
I wonder what's making
ed
teachers want to leave
in droves. That's such a good question. I wonder why.
We circle back to the top and we start all over again.
Yep. Ready, restart. Okay. So anyway, that's pretty much, the story of NCLB. No Child Left Behind. Everybody was left behind.
Everybody was left behind.
Well, maybe not everybody. Maybe there were
most people were left behind.
A lot of people were left behind.
Including a lot of teachers.
No Child, yes.
And a lot of principals.
Trying not to leave any child behind, but we left behind everybody else. And also a lot of students. I'm
interested when there's more data. I mean, we're only 7 years out of this. Like, this is the 7th year. So it's still pretty freshly, in our minds, obviously. But I'm going to be interested to see what this shift shows us.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned at the top, I think that part of the reason we still have to talk about this stuff and part of the reason we still need to make sure that our legislators are paying attention to this stuff is because without adequate funding to know whether or not what we did actually made the difference that we wanted it to make, we're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Right.
So
just point. Like NCLB Awareness Week or something. We need
a flyer.
Yeah, flyers, ad campaigns. Yeah. We got to start directing more dollars to this stuff because we're just going to be doomed to repeat our mistakes unless we know for a fact what we did and didn't do, what we accomplished, what we wanted to accomplish.
Unless we start investing more seriously in education.
Hey, maybe.
I mean, you know it, but like, honestly, I don't see any of these things changing.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to, like, we have to put money into this thing. We have to support teachers. We have to support, the people who work in these schools. Like, until we start investing all the way around, it's not going to happen.
We're going to be stuck repeating history. Anyway, well, cool.
Now that we've done that.
Now that we've depressed ourselves again, shall we move on to this week's fill in the blank?
Yeah, I'll do last episode's.
Yeah, last episode's question.
So this is from episode 50 about banned books. And it was, what was the first book ever banned in actually what was basically the pre-United States? And it was banned in 1637. That book was called The New English Canon by Thomas Warton.
Yeah, the Puritans hated it.
The Puritans. I mean, they didn't like much, though.
Must have been racy or something.
I think they're just angry.
Yes. In general, yes. I would say that's true of the Puritans.
How dare they?
Very unhappy people.
Are the Puritans like sinners in the hands of an angry God? Okay, that's what I was thinking of. That's what was coming to mind as I was...
That's Jonathan Edwards, right?
I thought that was the baby one.
You should look up Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God real quick.
No, that's not Jonathan Edwards.
That is?
The baby one is Jonathan Edwards. You're right.
Yeah.
That is him.
Yeah.
Wait, I thought he was the baby one.
Well, there might have been something to do with babies that he said also, but...
No, remember the one that was like, it's a satirical piece where it's like, well, we'll eat babies if we have to. I'm pretty sure that's Jonathan Edwards.
I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds scary and...
Jonathan Edwards, wow. The theologian. Oh my gosh, he does not look like what I thought he would. I read Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God.
Jonathan Edwards was later. This was in like 1637. Jonathan Edwards was like...
Oh, he was born in 1703.
Yeah.
Wow, he was the third president of Princeton. And he was preceded by Aaron Burr, sir.
Aaron Burr, sir?
Cool.
He was president of Princeton?
That's what it says.
What?
Is this the right man? Oh, no.
Different Aaron Burr?
Is this him?
I mean, I don't think that
Aaron
Burr...
No, this is a different Aaron Burr.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that Aaron Burr became Princeton's president.
Presbyterian minister and college educator in colonial America. So this must be family of Aaron Burr, sir.
Aaron Burr, sir.
Was our guy a junior? Oh my gosh, he was. That's Aaron Burr's dad.
Oh.
Wow.
Who knew?
Well, howdy doody.
That's going to be what you learned this week.
There we
go. Good to know.
Oh, I'm going to be singing Hamilton all day now.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that was interesting. Well, look at us learning.
Look at us.
So, back to the actual question.
Yeah.
The book that was first banned in the not U.S. at the time, but what is now the U.S., was called The New English Canaan by Thomas Morton.
Yep. Okay.
Great.
This episode's question.
That was so good.
It was good.
We just went all the way around.
It's Winter Olympic season.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. So the first Winter Olympics were held in Chamonix, France in 1924.
You just had to flex with that word.
It was very short. It was January 26th to February 4th. That's not a lot of days.
It's like 10 days, 9 days.
So that was the first Winter Olympics in 1924. There were 16 events with 258 athletes competing. That's probably why it was so short, because that's a very small number compared to now, too. The event drew just over 10,000 spectators. The first gold medal in Winter Olympics history went to a United States athlete.
Heck yes!
Who had
my USA chant.
Who had a stunning victory in the 500 meters speed skating event. That would be the only gold for the U.S. in the first Winter Olympics, with the Americans also capturing silver in hockey and figure skating, and bronze in ski jumping. Who won that first winter gold medal?
That's cool.
What was the name of that speed skater?
I didn't realize it was like that young.
Yeah.
Like that's only 100 years of those.
Yeah.
That's not very long.
No.
Wow. 1924.
We like the Winter Olympics. We like curling a lot.
So, what? We just finished World War I, and we're just ready for the Olympics, I guess.
We're ready for some peaceful sporting events.
That's interesting. I did not know that. I would have assumed that they were much older.
No.
Imagine what those, like, skates and skis were like.
Yeah, it's like strapping a pine tree to your legs.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And, like, imagine what those hockey guys were wearing.
Uh-huh.
Like, those dudes had no teeth.
Right.
0 teeth.
Absolutely. 0 teeth.
Oh, my gosh. I'm not built for that.
Okay. What did we learn? We both have the same thing that we learned this week.
Well, I have a couple things I could throw.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you start.
Well, I'll start. I'll start. We both learned this, though. We both learned how to be judges at a robotics competition.
We did.
Kate and I both served as judges for a VEX robotics competition in the southwestern quarter of the state. It was very interesting, very involved, really complicated. And I mean, I loved it. I was like blown away by what these little geeks were able to accomplish. It was a really fun experience for me personally, because I didn't have the opportunity to do robotics when I was in school. I wouldn't have even known what that was. So to see this program thriving and flourishing, and how seriously these kids take the ideas of, you know, engineering and design and programming and teamwork and all of this stuff, it was really, really cool. So yeah, that's what I learned. I learned all about robotics competitions.
Yeah, I did not know that whole world was out there.
It was really cool. They build these, whole world. You know, it's kind of like everyone talks about how it's kind of vaguely inspired by the idea of BattleBots, which was a very popular TV show when we were growing up, where people would make competition robots and they would go and kind of fight against each other. So
like duels.
These competitions, it's not so much about the robots fighting, but there's a game that everyone is trying to play and win and get points. And I'm sure they run into each other some, but the object is to complete the goal of this game, and everyone has to do it in a certain amount of time and without
it's pretty cool
catastrophic failure of the machines. But you hear about the design process, you hear about the revisions that they had to go through. They would try some things and realize they wouldn't work, and then they design new things. They'd reinforce parts of their robots so they wouldn't fall apart. It was a really neat experience. So.
Good work.
Yep. What did you learn?
That.
Yes, you also did learn that.
It was a lot. I was not qualified for the work that I was doing, I will say.
You did great.
Thank you. I'm just going to plug a couple shows, because God knows that's all I've done since I've been ill.
We've been a bit low energy.
We started The Gilded Age, which is on HBO Max. Mm-hmm. It has Christine Baranski and Cynthia Nixon. Mm-hmm. And it's done by Julian Fellows. And if you are a Downton Abbey fan, this is for you. Mm-hmm. It is beautiful. Mm-hmm. It is like Downton Abbey, but it's set in like the late 1800s in New York instead. Yeah. It's so good. There's only a couple episodes, and they're coming out weekly. So luckily, you don't have to like commit a whole week into it. You can just watch it like normal television, which is sort of refreshing from time to time to not just be inundated with 22 episodes of something. So The Gilded Age on HBO Max. And I had watched this, but Chelsea had not. We're watching Bones.
Yes.
Which is the TV series that was based off of Kathy Reich's books. And she's a forensic anthropologist. It's Emily Deschanel and David Boreanaz. Did I say his name right?
Boreanaz,
Boreanaz?
I think.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
I don't know. That
That
sounds
guy.
like what I'm
The
saying.
guy in Buffy.
He's
an
Angel. Yeah. It's a great show. Mm-hmm. So we've been doing that.
I'm way behind the times on that, to be quite clear. That's not a new show that's been around forever.
No.
I just missed it the first time
It's
around.
on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
All 12 seasons or something. Great show, though. Mm-hmm. Very fun. I've probably learned something watching that. There's a lot of science that I've probably consumed.
Yeah. With any kind of crime procedural, there's a lot of like goofy, not real science, but the show is kind of vaguely scientific most of the time. So,
and we're just kind of low-key prepping for an ice storm. So
that is something we're doing, yes.
That's where we are.
Yes.
So
we're about to have maybe like 3 to 6 inches of snow and also maybe half an inch of ice.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
We'll see. So take care of yourselves.
Yeah.
Take care of each other. Go get that booster if
Watch
you
out for Omicron because it's coming for all of us.
Wash your hands a lot. I mean, honestly, if you're around it, you're going to get
hands,
it. But
scrub your face.
But the good news is
Wear a
I know
hazmat
two
suit.
people who have some great recommendations on things to do and medicine to take when you get the Omicron. So
It's true.
No, really, I feel very fortunate. It has been quite mild and we will survive.
We will.
I'm just very tired.
Yeah. We'll see
So
you in
2 weeks. I won't sound like this.
Yes. We'll be much less tired by then, we hope. Unless
Probably.
we got that long COVID.
I really hope we don't. But we'll see you next time. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. It is a great time, like I said, to be supporting your local teachers and making sure that your voices are heard. And it's also Black History Month.
Yep.
So turn your ears and eyes to those important creators and Black community members and things like that you can be supporting, for sure.
Good.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I think that about wraps it
And
up.
freaking Punxsutawney Phil saw... Wait.
Yeah.
How's it work? He did see his shadow, so no more winter.
There's more winter.
So heck him.
I like snow. Bring on the snow.
I do too. I just don't want to drive to work in it.
True.
Anyways, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
Nap burrito.
Yeah, it was well done.
Well done, nap burrito.